The first time I saw a human, I laughed so hard my secondary stomach nearly ruptured. I am Vorkath, diplomatic observer for the Galactic Concord, and let me tell you something. When humanity submitted their application for membership into our alliance, the entire council chamber erupted in what can only be described as condescending amusement. These creatures, these soft-skinned bipeds from that backwater planet they call Earth, actually thought they belonged among the stars with us. Please, their bone density was pathetic. Their muscle fibers were weak and stringy. They had no natural armor, no venom sacs, no redundant organs, no protective exoskeleton. One of our military analysts, a Kravik named Thornmar, calculated that a standard Kravik warrior could snap a human spine with about as much effort as I would use to crack open a breakfast seed. The report became a running joke in our databases. But the Concord has rules, ancient rules. Before any species can be rejected, they must undergo the trial of worth, a series of physical and mental challenges designed to prove their value to the galactic community. The humans, bless their fragile little hearts, insisted on participating, so there I was, standing in the observation deck of Station Viridian, watching as the human delegation arrived. They came in a ship that looked like it was held together with optimism and duct tape, whatever that was. The airlocks hissed open, and out stepped Captain James Rutherford, their appointed champion. He was tall for a human, I suppose, but still a full head shorter than me. His hair was an odd shade of brown, graying at the temples. He wore a blue uniform that seemed unnecessarily decorated with colorful ribbons and medals. When he smiled at the welcoming committee, I noticed his teeth were flat and useless, designed for grinding plants rather than tearing flesh. "Greetings," he called out in that strange melodic language of theirs, which my translator earpiece converted into something comprehensible. "We are honored to be here." Thornmore, who stood beside me in the observation deck, made a gurgling sound that passed for Kravik laughter. "Honored? They should be terrified. The first trial is the Gauntlet of Fortitude. Most species lose at least 2 participants to fatal injuries." I nodded, updating my data pad. "How long do you think this one will last?" 20 seconds, Thornmore said. "I am being generous. The Gauntlet of Fortitude is not complicated. Participants must cross a 300-meter corridor filled with various obstacles, crushing pistons, laser grids, platforms that collapse unexpectedly, and, just for fun, a few predatory Skrix beasts that we keep semi-starved. It tests reflexes, strength, pain tolerance, and survival instinct." Captain Rutherford stood at the starting line, rolling his shoulders like he was preparing for a casual stroll. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He exploded forward with startling speed, and I mean that literally. I actually jumped in surprise. The first obstacle, a series of pneumatic hammers that swung from the ceiling, should have flattened him into a fleshy pancake. Instead, he ducked, weaved, and somehow slid beneath them with this bizarre fluidity. His body seemed to bend in ways our xenobiology experts had said was impossible for human physiology. "Lucky," Thornmore grunted. But then Rutherford hit the laser grid. These beams could slice through reinforced steel, and they moved in randomized patterns specifically designed to be unpredictable. The human paused for exactly 2 seconds, his eyes darting back and forth, and then he moved. What happened next still haunts my memory. He twisted his body through impossible angles, sliding through gaps that should not have accommodated his mass. When one laser came too close, he actually grabbed a piece of debris from the floor and used it as a shield, angling it so the beam deflected away. The smell of burning metal filled the observation deck through our sensory feeds. 45 seconds in, he reached the Skrix beasts. Now Skrix are nasty creatures. 6 legs, razor-sharp claws, acidic saliva, and a temperament that makes a rabid thornback look cuddly. We released 3 of them into the corridor, and they immediately locked onto the human with predatory focus. Rutherford did not run. He did not scream. He did not even look particularly worried. Instead, he picked up a metal pipe from the ground, a remnant from a previous participant who had not survived, and he waited. The first Skrix lunged, claws extended, mandibles clicking with hunger. The human sidestepped at the last possible moment and brought the pipe down on the creature's skull with a sickening crunch. The beast collapsed, twitching. The second and third Skrix attacked simultaneously from different angles. Basic pack hunting strategy. Effective against most prey. Rutherford spun, using the pipe like some kind of primitive weapon, and caught the second Skrix in its soft underbelly. It shrieked, a sound that made even Thornmore wince. Then, and this is the part that made absolutely no sense, the human grabbed the third Skrix by its mandibles, mid-lunge, and used its own momentum to slam it into the corridor wall. The impact left a dent in the reinforced steel. Silence filled the observation deck. Not a single being made a sound. We just stared. Rutherford crossed the finish line at the 2-minute 14-second mark. The current record was held by a Kravik warrior at 1 minute 58 seconds, but that warrior had been bred specifically for combat, genetically enhanced, and equipped with partial armor. Rutherford was just, well, Rutherford. He stood at the end of the corridor, barely breathing hard, and looked up at the observation deck. Then he smiled and gave us a thumbs-up gesture, which our cultural database informed me was a sign of victory or approval. "Explain that," I said to Thornmom. The Kravik warrior's scales had gone pale, a sign of deep confusion. "I cannot. But the trials were far from over. The Concord does not grant membership based on one impressive performance. The second trial was the Mind Maze, a psychological examination designed to break the will of participants through fear, isolation, and hallucinations. It had driven 17 species to complete psychological collapse. Some participants never fully recovered. They led Rutherford to the chamber, a perfect white cube where sensory manipulation technology would assault his mind with his deepest fears and darkest memories. The human entered without hesitation, and the door sealed behind him. I monitored his vital signs from my console. Heart rate, elevated but stable. Brain activity, normal. Stress hormones present but not overwhelming. The mind maze activated, and according to the readouts, it began showing Rutherford images of his own death, the destruction of his planet, the loss of his loved ones. Standard nightmare fuel. Most species start screaming within minutes. Rutherford sat down in the center of the room, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes. His heart rate actually decreased. "Is he broken?" Thornmore asked. "Did his mind snap already?" I checked the readings again. "No, he is. I think he is meditating." Meditating? In the mind maze? For 20 minutes the human just sat there while the most advanced psychological warfare technology in the galaxy threw everything it had at his consciousness. The maze showed him burning cities, dying children, endless void, cosmic horror beyond description. His brain registered all of it. The sensors confirmed he was experiencing the stimuli. He just did not seem to care. Finally, the maze shut down, unable to break him. Rutherford opened his eyes, stood up, brushed off his uniform, and walked to the exit. When the door opened, he looked at the proctors and said, "That was interesting. Do you have anything stronger?" I had to file an official report on that trial, and I struggled to find words that would not make me sound insane. How do you explain that a species we classified as weak just shrugged off psychological torture that broke minds far more developed than theirs? The third trial was scheduled for the following day, the test of unity. This one required teamwork. The human delegation would have to work with a group of Concord representatives to solve a complex problem under pressure. It was designed to measure cooperation, communication, and cultural adaptability. That night I could not sleep. My minds, I have three, were racing with questions. I decided to do something unusual. I accessed the human data files, the ones they had submitted with their application, and I actually read them this time. Before I had dismissed them as irrelevant propaganda. Now I wanted answers. What I found disturbed me greatly. Humans evolved on a death world. Earth is classified as a Type 7 hazard planet, which means it should not support complex life at all. The gravity is crushing by galactic standards. The atmosphere is corrosive and unpredictable. The weather systems are violently chaotic. The planet is tectonically unstable. It is regularly bombarded by space debris. And the biodiversity, oh, the biodiversity. Earth is home to millions of species that have spent billions of years trying to kill each other in increasingly creative ways. Venomous insects, apex predators, microscopic pathogens, plants that can poison you with a touch. The oceans contain creatures that can crush submarines. The land hosts predators that hunt in packs with sophisticated strategies. And humans, these soft, fragile humans, sat at the top of that food chain. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest or the most venomous, but because they were persistent, because they adapted, because they learned, because they never ever stopped trying to survive. I read about human history, and it was a litany of disasters that would have exterminated any sensible species. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plagues, wars, famines. Each time, their population would crash to near extinction levels. Each time, they came back. Each time, they came back stronger. There was a section in their files about something they called persistence hunting. Before they had advanced tools, humans would simply chase prey animals until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. They would run for hours, sometimes days, just following their target until it gave up. The human body, it turns out, is an endurance machine wrapped in fragile skin. I was still reading when the alarm sounded. It was an emergency, the kind that makes your blood freeze in your veins. A group of young Concord members, children from various species who were on the station for an educational program, had accidentally triggered a lockdown in one of the restricted sectors. The sector was depressurizing, the life support was failing, and the bulkhead doors had jammed. Rescue teams were scrambling, but the estimate was 15 minutes before they could cut through. The children had maybe 5 minutes of breathable air left. I ran to the command center, my heart's pounding in different rhythms. The screens showed the trapped children, 6 of them, ranging in age from juvenile to barely hatched. They were scared, crying, banging on the doors. The species represented included Kravik, Matharian, Zenthil, and even a young Quarian, whose biology made them particularly vulnerable to oxygen deprivation. Captain Rutherford appeared beside me so suddenly that I nearly fell over. "What is happening?" he demanded. I explained, probably too quickly, my words tumbling over each other. The human's face, which had been calm and pleasant, transformed into something harder, something frightening. "Where?" he snapped. I showed him the location on the schematic, Sector 12, Level 8. The route was blocked by the lockdown, and the manual override was inside the sector itself, unreachable. Rutherford studied the screen for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned and ran, not toward the rescue teams, but toward the maintenance shafts. Before anyone could stop him, he had pried open an access panel and disappeared into the guts of the station. "What is he doing?" Thornmore roared. "That shaft system is not designed for travel. It is barely pressurized. The temperature fluctuates to lethal extremes, and there are exposed power conduits." I pulled up the internal sensors and tracked the human's progress. He was crawling through spaces barely large enough for his body, pulling himself along with raw strength. The temperature in those shafts ranged from below freezing to hot enough to boil water. The air was thin and filled with toxic particulates from the station's recycling systems. Rutherford did not slow down. He moved with mechanical efficiency, ignoring the heat that must have been searing his skin, ignoring the cold that should have frozen his joints. At one point he had to squeeze through a gap so narrow that my sensors showed his ribcage compressing dangerously. He exhaled completely, making himself smaller, and forced his way through. It took him 4 minutes to reach the sector. 4 minutes of crawling through hell while those children suffocated. When he emerged from the maintenance shaft into the corridor outside their location, his uniform was torn, his hands were bleeding, and his face was covered in burns and frost damage. He did not pause to assess his injuries. He went straight to the bulkhead door, found the manual override panel, and discovered it was fried from the electrical surge that had caused the initial malfunction. The human looked at the door, looked at his bleeding hands, and made a decision that I still cannot believe was real. He wedged his fingers into the seal where the 2 halves of the bulkhead met, braced his feet against the wall and pulled. The sensors in that corridor registered the strain on the door mechanism. It required approximately 12,000 newtons of force to manually separate those seals. The human pulled with everything he had, his muscles tearing, his bones creaking under the pressure, his cardiovascular system pushed beyond any reasonable limit. The door moved, just a centimeter, then another. Then it shifted suddenly, the mechanism giving way, and the bulkhead opened wide enough for the children to escape. They stumbled out, gasping and crying, and the human counted them, making sure all 6 were accounted for. Only then did he allow himself to collapse against the wall, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his hands. The rescue team arrived 30 seconds later and found Captain Rutherford sitting on the floor, surrounded by traumatized children, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Everyone okay?" he asked. They rushed him to medical, of course. The doctors were horrified by what they found. Severe burns, frostbite, torn muscles, fractured bones in both hands, lung damage from the toxic air, internal bleeding. Any one of these injuries should have incapacitated him. Together, they should have killed him. The human accepted treatment with cheerful gratitude and asked if he could get back to the trial soon because he did not want to miss anything important. I visited him in the medical bay that evening. He was sitting up in bed, his hands wrapped in regenerative bandages, reading something on a datapad. When he saw me, he smiled that infuriating human smile. "Vorkath, right?" he said. "The observer?" I nodded, unable to find words. Finally, I managed. "Why did you do that?" He looked confused. "Do what?" "Risk your life for children that are not even your species." The human set down his datapad and gave me a look that I will never forget. It was not angry or condescending, it was patient, like he was explaining something obvious to someone who should already understand. "Because they were children," he said simply. "Because they needed help. Because I could." And in that moment I realized something that terrified me more than any Skrix beast or psychological maze ever could. We had been wrong about humans. Catastrophically, dangerously wrong. Their weakness was not weakness at all. It was something we had never encountered before, something we had no proper word for in our languages. Humans were not strong in spite of their fragility. They were strong because of it. They had spent their entire evolutionary history as prey animals who refused to accept that role. They had turned their vulnerabilities into weapons, their limitations into motivations. They did not survive because they were tough. They survived because they were too stubborn to die. The following morning I received a summons from the Concord Council. They wanted answers about the human who had somehow managed to make our entire evaluation system look like a joke designed by incompetent hatchlings. I stood before the council chamber, a vast circular room where representatives from 47 species sat in elevated seats, looking down at me like I was personally responsible for this mess. High Chancellor Morvax, a being so old that parts of his consciousness existed in crystallized memory banks, spoke first. "Observer Vorkath," his voice rumbled through the translation systems, "explain to us how a species we classified as Category 4 weakness has now exceeded performance standards in every trial administered thus far." I swallowed, which is difficult when you have 3 throats. "Honored Chancellor, I believe our initial assessment was based on incomplete data," a Matherian council member, her bioluminescent skin flashing with irritation, interrupted. "Incomplete? We had their complete biological specifications. We analyzed their bone density, their muscle composition, their cardiovascular limitations. The mathematics were irrefutable." "Yes," I agreed carefully. "The mathematics told us what humans are made of. They did not tell us what humans are capable of." Before the council could respond, alarms shrieked through the station again. This was becoming a disturbing pattern. The security chief's face appeared on the main display, his expression grim. "We have a situation in the education wing. The human delegation brought their children for the cultural exchange program, and there has been an incident." My heart sank. Children? Why did it always involve children? The council adjourned immediately, and we rushed to the education wing, which had been converted into a sort of interspecies learning center. When we arrived, we found chaos. Not the dangerous kind, but the confusing kind. 6 human children, ranging in age from what appeared to be 6 to 12 standard years, were standing in the center of a crowd of young Concord members from various species. The human children looked small and fragile compared to the others. One of them, a girl with bright red hair tied in braids, was explaining something with wild hand gestures while the alien children listened with rapt attention. "And then," she was saying, "my dad put the fire out with just a blanket. He wrapped it around the stove and smothered the flames because fire needs oxygen to burn, and cutting off the oxygen kills it." A young Kravik, his scales still soft with youth, clicked his mandibles in amazement. "Your parent fights fire with cloth. This is not tactical foolishness." The human girl laughed. "No, it is smart. Fire is just chemistry. You control the chemistry, you control the fire." I noticed Captain Rutherford standing off to the side, his bandaged hands clasped behind his back, watching with obvious pride. When he saw me, he nodded in greeting. "What is happening here?" I asked. "Cultural exchange," he said. The kids were showing each other what life is like on their home worlds. Apparently the other children had some questions about Earth. That was an understatement. The alien children were absolutely fascinated, and frankly horrified, by what the human children were describing. A Zenthil youngster, his eye stalks quivering with distress, asked, "You have storms that spin in circles and destroy entire settlements?" A human boy, missing his 2 front teeth, nodded enthusiastically. "Tornadoes and hurricanes. We had to hide in our basement once when a tornado came through. It sounded like a giant monster roaring." "And your parents simply hid?" a Matherian child asked. "They did not attempt to flee the planet. The toothless boy looked confused. Flee? It is just weather. It passes. Another human child, an older girl wearing strange eye coverings she called glasses, added, plus we have warning systems now. We can track storms and predict where they will go. Usually, the Metharian repeated faintly. Thornmoor appeared beside me, watching the scene with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It took me a moment to identify it as wonder. They teach their children to accept catastrophe as normal, he murmured. They raise them in an environment of constant threat and call it home. The red-haired girl was now describing something called a bear. They are huge and covered in fur and have claws this long. She spread her small hands apart, exaggerating only slightly, and they can run super fast and climb trees and swim, and sometimes they come into neighborhoods looking for food. The alien children looked terrified. One of them asked, "What weapons do your warriors use to drive them away?" "We do not always drive them away," the girl said. "Sometimes we just make loud noises and they leave, or we use special trash cans they cannot open. My mum says we have to share the planet with them." A Quarian child, speaking through a translation device, asked the question that I could see forming in all the adult observers' minds. Why do humans remain on such a dangerous world? Why not seek safer planets? The human children looked at each other, genuinely confused by the question. Finally, the oldest one, a boy with dark skin and kind eyes, answered, "Because it is our home. Yeah, it is dangerous sometimes, but it is also beautiful. We have mountains and oceans, and forests and deserts. We have animals and plants that are amazing. Why would we leave?" "To survive," the Quarian child said simply. The human boy smiled. "We do survive, that is the point." I was processing this exchange when the red-haired girl noticed me staring. She walked right up to me, fearless, and tilted her head back to meet my eyes. I am 3 times her height and probably 50 times her mass. She did not even blink. "Are you Vorkath?" she asked. "My dad said you are the one observing us." "Yes," I managed. "Cool," she grinned, showing the gap where she had lost one of her teeth. "Do you want to know something awesome about humans?" Before I could answer, she continued, "We are persistence predators. That means we are really good at not giving up. Like there is this thing called a marathon, where people run for 26 miles just for fun. Can you believe that? For fun." Thornmoor made a choking sound. "Your species engages in extreme endurance activities recreationally?" "Oh yeah," another human child chimed in. "My uncle did something called an Ironman. You swim, then bike, then run, all in one day. He said it was hard but awesome." The alien children were staring at the human children like they were describing voluntary torture, which from their perspective they probably were. The red-haired girl was not finished. "And we heal really fast too. Watch this." She pulled up her sleeve to show a scraped elbow that was already scabbing over. "I fell off my bike yesterday, and it is already getting better. My body just fixes itself." A Metharian child touched the scrape gently with a tentacle. "Your body repairs damage without medical intervention?" "Well, for small stuff, yeah. Cuts, bruises, broken bones take longer, but they heal too eventually." I watched Thornmoor's expression cycle through disbelief, confusion, and finally resignation. They are miniature versions of their adults. Of course they are. The educational exchange continued, and with each passing minute, I watched the Concord children's perception of humans shift. They had started the day thinking of humans as weak and primitive. Now they were looking at these small human children with something approaching awe. One of the Kravik youngsters asked about human games, and the human children eagerly described something called tag, where they chased each other for entertainment. Then they mentioned dodgeball, which involved throwing spheres at each other deliberately. "You throw projectiles at each other for amusement?" the Kravik asked. "It is fun," the toothless boy insisted. "You have to be quick and dodge, and it helps you get better at not getting hit." The Kravik youngster turned to his parent, who was observing from the side. "Father, may I request that we incorporate human training methods into my education?" The adult Kravik looked mortified. But the most significant moment came when one of the Zenthil children asked about fear. "Do humans experience fear like other species?" The human children nodded. The oldest boy said, "Of course we get scared. Everyone gets scared. Then how do you function on your death world? How do you not flee in terror constantly?" The boy thought about this for a moment. "I guess we just do scared things anyway. Being brave does not mean you are not afraid. It means you are afraid and you do it anyway." Silence fell over the room. I saw several adult observers exchange glances. This simple statement from a human child had just articulated something profound that our psychologists had spent centuries trying to define. The red-haired girl added, "My teacher says courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision that something else is more important than fear." High Chancellor Morvax, who had been observing silently through a remote drone, spoke for the first time. "Human child, what is more important than fear?" She looked directly at the drone's camera with those bright young eyes and said, "Lots of things. Helping people, protecting your family, learning new stuff, making friends, doing the right thing. Fear is just a feeling. Feelings do not have to control you." I heard Thornmore whisper, "We are doomed." "What?" I asked. If this is what their children understand, imagine what their adults are capable of when fully motivated. The council reconvened that afternoon for an emergency session. The test of unity had been scheduled, but events had overtaken planning. The incident with the trapped children, combined with the cultural exchange, had fundamentally altered the evaluation process. Chancellor Morvax addressed the assembly. "We face an unprecedented situation. The human delegation has demonstrated capabilities that contradict our initial assessments. Furthermore, their children have provided insight into human psychology that disturbs our fundamental understanding of survival behavior." A council member from the Voltorian Collective raised a tentacle. "I propose we accelerate the evaluation. We need to understand whether humans represent an asset or a threat to the Concord. They saved our children," a Matherian representative pointed out. "How does that constitute a threat?" "A species that does not recognize reasonable fear is unpredictable," the Voltorian argued. "They might take risks that endanger us all." Captain Rutherford, who had been invited to observe this session, asked permission to speak. The council granted it. "With respect," he began, his voice calm and measured, "I think you are misunderstanding us. We do not lack fear. We are afraid all the time. Afraid of failure, afraid of loss, afraid of the unknown. But we learned a long time ago that fear is just information. It tells you there is danger, but it does not tell you what to do about that danger." He paused, looking around the chamber. "On Earth we have a saying, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. It means that if you let fear control you, you have already lost. So we teach our children to acknowledge fear, respect it, but not obey it blindly." Thorma stood from his seat. "Human Rutherford, your species fights apex predators, endures environmental catastrophes, and suffers injuries that would kill most of us, all while maintaining social bonds and raising offspring. How?" Rutherford smiled. "Practice. We have been doing it for about 200,000 years. You get good at things when you do them long enough." The council debated for hours. I watched species after species struggle with the cognitive dissonance of humans being simultaneously fragile and formidable. Finally, Chancellor Morvax called for order. "We will proceed with a modified final trial," he announced. "Instead of the test of unity, we will implement a scenario evaluation. The humans will face a simulated crisis that requires cooperation between species with different capabilities. They will work alongside our people, and we will assess their true value to the Concord." The scenario was designed quickly, perhaps too quickly. A simulated ship malfunction in deep space, requiring coordinated efforts to repair critical systems before life support failed. The human delegation would work with a mixed team of Concord members. They set it up in one of our training facilities, a massive simulation chamber that could replicate any environment. The scenario began with alarms blaring and smoke filling the corridors. The mixed team, which included Rutherford, 3 other humans, 2 Kravix, a Matherian and a Zenthil, had to work together to survive. I watched from the observation room as the scenario unfolded. The ship was losing oxygen, the engines were failing, and debris from a simulated collision was blocking access to critical systems. It was chaos by design. The humans immediately started organizing, not ordering, organizing. One of them, a woman named Lieutenant Torres, began assessing each team member's capabilities. "Okay," she said quickly. "We need to prioritize. First, oxygen. Second, engine stabilization. Third, hull breach. Matherian, can you interface with the environmental systems?" The Matherian, whose biology allowed direct neural connection with computer systems, nodded and moved to a terminal. "Kravix, we need muscle. There is debris blocking the engine room. Can you clear it?" The Kravik warriors who had been preparing to simply charge forward paused, then they nodded and moved together with coordinated purpose. "Zenthil, your species can survive in low oxygen longer than the rest of us. If we lose atmosphere before we fix this, we will need you to access the external repair systems. The Zenthil, understanding his role was crucial, positioned himself near the airlock. Lieutenant Torres turned to her fellow humans. We handle the technical repairs and backup support. Move. What happened over the next 30 minutes was a masterclass in adaptive cooperation. The humans never tried to do everything themselves. Instead, they identified what each species did best and utilized those strengths. When a Kravik warrior struggled with a delicate repair, a human stepped in with smaller, more nimble fingers. When a human needed something heavy moved, the Kraviks handled it. But more importantly, the humans kept everyone calm. When the Metharian started panicking as oxygen levels dropped, one of the humans, a man named Officer Park, talked him through the fear. Hey, look at me. Breathe. We have time. You are doing great. Just focus on the next step, not the whole problem. What is the next step? The Metharian's bioluminescence, which had been flashing erratically, stabilized. Reroute power from secondary systems. Perfect. Do that. Just that. Then we will worry about the next thing. They solved the scenario with 47 seconds of oxygen remaining. When the simulation ended and the lights came back on, the entire team was breathing hard. Some of them collapsed on the floor, but they were all alive, and they were smiling. The Kraviks were slapping the humans on the back with what could have been lethal force, but the humans just laughed and returned the gesture. The Metharian was chattering excitedly about the experience. The Zenthil was praising the teamwork. Captain Rutherford helped Lieutenant Torres to her feet. Nice job, Maria. You too, Captain. Though next time, maybe we ask for a scenario that does not involve near-death experiences? He laughed. Where would be the fun in that? I filed my final report that evening. It was the hardest thing I have ever written because it required me to admit how catastrophically wrong I had been. The report concluded, humans are not weak. They are anti-fragile. They grow stronger through adversity, not despite it. Their psychological resilience is unmatched. Their capacity for cooperation transcends species boundaries. They do not merely survive hostile environments, they thrive in them and then seek out new challenges voluntarily. Recommendation: immediate acceptance into the Galactic Concord with full membership status. Furthermore, consideration should be given to establishing human training protocols for Concord members in survival skills, crisis management, and psychological fortitude. The Council voted the next day. The decision was not unanimous. Some species still harbored reservations, but it was overwhelming. Humanity was welcomed into the Galactic Concord. During the acceptance ceremony, Chancellor Morvax addressed Captain Rutherford directly. Your species has taught us something valuable. We measured strength by what you are made of. You showed us that strength is measured by what you do with what you have. Rutherford bowed respectfully. Thank you, Chancellor. We look forward to learning from all of you as well. The galaxy is big and dangerous and amazing, and we are excited to explore it together. As the ceremony concluded, I found myself standing next to the red-haired human child from the educational exchange. She tugged on my sleeve to get my attention. Mr. Vorkath, she said, I wanted to ask you something. Yes, young human. When you first saw us, did you think we were weak? I considered lying, but something about her direct gaze made that impossible. Yes, I did. She nodded seriously. That is okay. A lot of people think that at first, but you know what my dad taught me. What is that? She grinned. Being underestimated is a superpower. People do not see you coming. Then she ran off to join the other children, leaving me standing there with a sudden, terrifying realization. Humanity had not just passed our trials, they had fundamentally changed how we understood survival, strength, and potential. And if their children were already thinking strategically about being underestimated, what would they become as adults? Thornmaw appeared beside me, watching the humans celebrate with their new Concord allies. I have been thinking, he said slowly. In all our history we have never encountered a species quite like them. No, I agreed. They should not exist. Their planet should have killed them. Their physiology should have limited them. Their psychology should have broken them. Yes. But they are here anyway. Yes. Thornmaw was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that I think summarized the entire human experience perfectly. They are very bad at accepting what should be. I laughed. A sound that startled both of us. Yes. Yes, they are. And that is precisely why they belong here with us. The galaxy does not need more species who accept limitations. It needs species who look at the impossible and say, watch me anyway. As I filed my last observation report and prepared to move on to my next assignment, I added one final note, a personal observation, not required by protocol, but one I felt compelled to record. The humans call their planet Earth. We classify it as a Type 7 hazard world. They call it home and speak of it with love. This contradiction, this ability to find beauty in danger and strength in fragility, is not a weakness to be corrected. It is a gift to be celebrated. The Galactic Concord is stronger for having them among us. We thought humans were weak. Their children helped us see the truth. Weakness and strength are not about what you are born with. They are about what you choose to do when tested. And humans, when tested, choose to stand up, dust themselves off and try again, every single time. That is not weakness, that is terrifying, that is wonderful,